Welcome back to DejaVue. It's your favorite Vue podcast, and you probably know it by now. First of all, it's a bit belated, but Happy New Year to everyone out there. I hope you had some relaxing holidays, some downtime, maybe some time to work on some side projects, open source contributions, and so on, so on, so on. Let us definitely know what you did in your free time, and if you could get away from all the electronic devices, or like, no, I have to finish, I have to put out a side project. And yeah, why not taking the time now that it's 2025 to have a look at what happened last year, so to say, a year in review. And of course, that can't be done alone. So we got a lovely guest on here. He is, well, you all know him already, but he's the lead of the Nuxt.js team. He is a full-time open source developer. And of course, when he's not coding, which is very, very rare, then he's probably out there bouldering around the world somewhere. It's Daniel Roe, everybody. Daniel, how are you doing?
Hi, it's nice to be here. And obviously, I took a break from my difficult bouldering schedule to make the recording.
Perfect.
Yeah, doing very well, thanks.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, and I mean, also, like all the releases coming out, we have a few things on the list, quite a packed schedule, so to say. Also said beforehand, you know probably half of the releases we have on the list anyway, because you were either in charge of them or at least somewhat contributed. So do you have something? If I have to pick one thing from 2024, this is it. This has to be mentioned.
One of the things I was most excited about was Nuxt Fonts, which I think probably because I was so involved in building it. You know, a user of Nuxt, I benefit from lots of things that other people code. You know, like Nuxt DevTools, for example, I'm basically not at all involved in doing, and yet it's one of the best things about Nuxt. But somehow when you're involved in creating something yourself, you always feel this little sense of, yay, that was cool.
Absolutely.
And I definitely felt that way about Nuxt Fonts. It was pretty cool.
Nice. And yeah, the initial release was, I think, around Vue.js Amsterdam time. I think you released it. Did you release it live on stage? I think so, right?
Yes. Is that right? I think... Yeah, I think
there was something like
maybe
that,
I did.
Right? So link to the talk definitely in the show notes, because of course then you also gave a talk all about Nuxt.js, and also a link to the shop for 2025 edition of Vue.js Amsterdam, which is coming up in March, so very soon, with the discount code there. So just to mention, drop it in with code DejaVue, you get 10% off. But yeah, back to Nuxt Fonts, like how did you see the project evolving from its initial release that's, well, almost like a year ago now? Did a lot change?
So, I mean, I remember sort of drafting some RFCs for Nuxt scripts, assets, and fonts, and having a look through. And obviously, you know, the Nuxt assets isn't built as a project, although the ideas of it are implemented in scripts and fonts. And scripts isn't entirely implemented as I sort of imagined it. I think it's probably implemented better. But I mean, I remember sort of writing Nuxt fonts and just thinking about what it could be. Because we have examples of how font integrations work in other frameworks. Next.js, for example, has a font integration, which is basically importing from a file and then sort of binding those styles to an element in the same kind of way that you would in React or in CSS and JS. And obviously there's stuff like font source, which lets you do the same kind of thing in any framework. But actually sort of starting to build it, I just realizing, actually, we can do this with no configuration. We can do this from CSS. You know, we don't need to have people explicitly import anything. It can just work for them. And that was an incredible. So, which was not as I totally imagined it, I think, in the beginning. I would have to go back and have a look at exactly what ended up in the RFC. But I think it definitely, as we were working on it, it just sort of expanded, you know, in terms of capability, and that was fun.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, now it's everybody who's using a web font out there, no matter if local or from any kind of provider, should use Nuxt Fonts to get all the benefits. Also of Fontaine, which you managed before, which is also integrated into that, and of course also like downloading the font, serving it locally to avoid all the GDPR hassle, and so on, so on. So there are a lot of neat features out there straight away that people can use without any downsides, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it should be, you know, as what we aim for and everything, really. And all the Nuxt libraries, the sort of idea of the progressive path where, you know, it sort of does things for you that are best practices, and you can always sort of take full control. And yeah, so you get the benefit of not needing a pre-connect. You get the benefit of the CSS being generated for you for the fallback fonts. Yeah, I think that, you get a lot of things out of the box.
Sweet.
And the multi-provider is a big thing. So, you're not making choices between how to set up Google or Bunny or Font Source or FontShare or whatever, or how to add the links even to a local font that you drop into your public directory, but it just works. I recall using a library years ago called PostCSS Font Magician.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure it did something similar, as in it detected what you were using from CSS and added some links. So in terms of it added links to Google Fonts in your CSS. So I think that, there's prior art out there in terms of people thinking about how to do this magically. But yeah, it does a lot of things just for you, so you don't have to do them or think about them.
As well, the video or also your talk shows, you just say, hey, I want to use, pop-ins, wingdings, whatsoever, and it will just magically work out of the box.
Yeah, it just works. So almost everything that needs to be done, there are some complexities. So for example, we can't yet determine what font weights you use because of CSS being cascading. So you can, set bold higher up and then you're using a font lower down. So we don't know necessarily that is going to be bold or not. So you do have to configure your weights. But I'd like to think that even that we might be able at some point to at least configure if you explicitly set it. If you say this font and then font weight, we should know that. We should be able to grab the right font weight for that one. So I think there are some further improvements. My aim would be for it to be as optimized as possible, even maybe doing some automatic subsetting. So very common, for example, that people use a heading font. If we know all the headings in your app and we know we should be able to create for you the subset font, which just has the characters needed to render those headings. Now that's a pain to do manually because every time you change a heading, you have to resubset the font. So if we can automate that for you and create smaller fonts for users, I think that's a nice feature to have. It would be opt-in, of course, because it does mean that you then have a font that isn't quite as cacheable between deploys if you're subsetting slightly different characters. But I think, there are things we can do to make it even better and from a performance point of view.
And I guess it also only works then for, let's say, static content, because as soon as you fetch content from like a headless CMS, it will be a bit trickier with the subset.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you could probably still say, configure-wise, only the Latin subset, only the Cyrillic subset, whatsoever. So, you at least exclude is what I did in the past with fonts, certain letters that definitely will not use, or alphabet-wise. So
accent characters and stuff like that. Where you're like, I don't think I'm going to be using it. But it always comes back to bite me. And I think it's one of the things that, this isn't, very year in review, but I think that I was giving a talk just last night at a meetup about fonts. So I'm going to go on about fonts forever,
That's fine. That's fine. I'll stop you.
And it's one of the things that I think we can get wrong as developers when we're using custom web fonts, and we can install them on our computer. That's a terrible thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it means you see the font you have installed on your computer and you never see the web font. So, you have characters missing in the web font, you wouldn't know because you have it locally. You see, using a font weight that isn't supplied in your HTML, there's no rules in your CSS about it, but it still works because it's on your local computer. So if you're like me and you're like, hey, I want all the fonts in the world installed locally, and you just sort of download some pack, and then you're using that in a site that you're building, you might miss big visual problems unless you have some kind of way of testing, which might be, for example, to have a different name.
Yeah,
so it doesn't load
the local one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So actually, we could probably make that work in Nuxt Fonts for you automatically. So you use Poppins and we just rename it for you. We're like Poppins Web. Because all that matters is that it matches with the font face that's generated, and we're generating it. So it's not something you would even need to think about. That might be. There you go. Thank you, Alex. Good idea.
Yep. Already worth coming on to the DejaVue podcast again. It's really funny, though, because I worked at a client project. There was the same issue that everybody, but not of developers, but actually of the stakeholders checking the website had the font installed. And of course, some of the developers came like, hey, that's not the corporate identity font. And we're like, what? We set it here. Like, yeah, but never loaded. So then nobody noticed, of course, because they all had to install locally for legacy reasons, I guess. That's definitely a real thing. And looking forward to have that fixed in Nuxt Fonts, or fixed, let's say, to make it easier to spot these problems.
Do you know, I have I think it's one of the most useful things you can do on getting a new website up is to create an end-to-end test that just takes a picture of the homepage. Yeah. That's it. And like, obviously you expect this to sort of change as you change the homepage or whatever. But just having it in CI, the test is run and probably auto-fixed, like automatically updated. So you're not having to manually run this all the time. But it means that you visually reviewing the PR, you're like, this is what the Playwright computer is seeing. And not what I'm seeing on my computer. And that is, I think, it detects serious regressions, like your CSS breaks for some reason, you're targeting the wrong selector. CI will always pass. It's very difficult to sort of test that. Well, I mean, you can do it, but it often adds friction and people don't end up doing that. So just screenshot your homepage and it gives you a huge amount of coverage of things are rendering as they're expected to. I find it finds font problems.
That for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I love that idea in general. It's like, hey, it's not a like make or break CI task. Just like, here is that. You can look at it while you review the PR anyway or before merging it, and it's fine. So just like having that, it works on my machine problem sorted out by another entity, in this case, the CI and Playwright solving that is, it's really smart. I think, and it shouldn't cost that much either. Spinning up a Playwright instance, making a screenshot. CI minute-wise shouldn't be too expensive. So definitely something that people should add to a project. Love that idea.
Yeah.
Coming back to the rear and review, I think it's still good because I guess the font problems bit you quite some time since you worked a lot on fonts in 2024. Maybe even go back from February when Nuxt Fonts was released, a little bit back to, let's say, the 1st of January, which was a remarkable day in 2024. It was the first day where Vue 2 was end of life, so to say. So how did you feel on that day? Some joy, some pain?
I think by that time, I had not been using Vue 2 for a very long time, other than to support people with Nuxt 2. And I think I wasn't totally weightless because we were still supporting Nuxt at this point, and Nuxt 2. And we didn't want to drop that at the moment that we dropped support for Vue. It would have been nice, but really I was then still going to be working with Vue 2 for a bit. So it felt more like a stepping stone in the right direction. I mean, I regard the move from Vue 2 to Vue 3 as a totally good one. I really like it. Vue 3 is more performant. Obviously, it drops support for some certain legacy systems that don't support proxies. But again, I think, often as a developer, I feel you're limited. The language is evolving. There are new features. There are great new built-ins. All the time they're coming out. But you're always having to code defensively for the older systems you're supporting. And that's even more so, obviously, for both of us as sort of maintaining Nuxt. We can't just adopt the sort of latest thing that's coming out in Node 22 or in the latest, bleeding edge browser, Chromium release or whatever. We can't, even if we want to, even if it's going to be a pretty cool thing. The most we can do is let users opt in with an experimental flag, which obviously we do. It's so it's hard to have to support back. But the Vue 2 to Vue 3 migration, it was it might have been painful, but I think the result at the end with Vue 3 and the composition API is just gorgeous. And Vue 3, I think, fixed a lot of gotchas also with Vue 2 in terms of how reactivity worked. Do you remember having to mutate arrays like? That was always a thing. Like, why doesn't this work in the same way that objects worked? And things work a bit better in Vue 3, and that's really nice to see. I think I'm a lot happier with Vue's general progress, though, at the end of the year than I was in the beginning, because in January 1, although we were dropping support for Vue 2, the progress of Vue 3 was a bit slow. It felt like releases were taking quite a while. There were some significant issues with SSR. And in general, it felt like Vue 3 was done, but there were still some issues and things were a bit slow. I don't mean to be mean or anything, because what I think I've seen across the year is that stuff is really picking up on Vue. So a lot more contributions, bug fixes are being merged. The SSR story is a lot more stable. I'm loving the work on improving the reactivity system, where already by this point have had 2 almost complete refactors of reactivity in Vue in minor releases that have made it so much more performant. I mean, it's incredible to see. Particular hat tip to Johnson and also Evan, of course, as well, who's been working on that. But Vue has just really started accelerating in terms of pace of development and improvements going on. So I'm really excited about that.
And on that note, also, yeah, you said it, minor versions, which means no breaking changes. So two times refactor to different system under the hood without breaking anything. And now we can jump a little bit further with Alien Signals 1.0 being released just a couple of days ago, and which was going on for a while. We see even more performance improvements and another refactor of the system. So that's super exciting to see, okay, people from the Vue ecosystem are pushing the boundaries. And with that library, it's not even tied to Vue itself anymore. It's more like, hey, this is a single library people can use, and like Angular signals, solid signals, Preact, whatsoever, they can all implement it with the same ideas and techniques, not necessarily depending on the library, but using the same patterns.
Yeah. Although, you know that Johnson got into some hot water. You probably know this, right?
I do.
You're like, I wasn't planning on going into that, Daniel, but if you insist,
bring it on. Bring it on.
Well, I think the package was originally called native signals.
Yes.
And this was criticized because it's not. There's a proposal, obviously, to bring signals natively to the browser, and this was not an implementation of that. I think Johnson meant it to be sort of as close to sort of native JavaScript, as close to like really, really minimal, rather than it have anything to do with the proposal. And actually, I felt that it was really like the sort of negative press he got. It was really, really unfortunate. Like, anyway, I thought it was really bad form. And I think the people who made him feel bad really ought to take a good hard look in the mirror at what they were doing to an open source maintainer who was trying to make the web a better place.
Yeah, that's the craziest part. It's not even like, I don't know, about competition or framework wars or whatsoever. We're like, yeah, okay, It might still be a little bit of foul play, but okay, kind of like people do that sometimes, like the weird joke with JSX versus Svelte and Vue components, but that's also another story. But in there also was like, hey, come on, Johnson is trying to improve, as you said, the web ecosystem, making better for everyone, than saying, oh, basically, how dare you naming it that way? Come on. But I'm very happy that this, in a way, got, I wouldn't say necessarily resolved, but like this conflict isn't there anymore with the renaming, also moving it to the StackBlitz org. And funnily, we went full circle now because Johnson created a PR to the TC49 Signals proposal to write the polyfill based on the Alien Signal 1.0 implementation. Still, of course, not passing all tests and so on, but like, okay, hey, that's the outline. If you want to make sure all the tests are passing, that's further up to the maintainers. But in a way that comes back now to the proposal, making that ideally also super fast. So, yeah.
I mean, Johnson is an example of a lot of the people who are working behind the scenes who don't necessarily receive the appreciation they deserve, who are making things better for everybody. Obviously, from Volar, one of the reasons Vue 3 is so great is the TypeScript integration and therefore the IDE integration. And a lot of that is driven by Vue.TSC. So if we didn't have that, if we didn't have this really strong type checking experience, if we didn't have not just an IDE extension, but something you could actually run in the terminal to type check Vue components, developer experience of Vue would be hugely less. And yeah, I'm not sure he always gets the appreciation he deserves.
I think it's actually even worse than that. I think he also gets some unjustified negativity, like especially on some social media, there's always like, oh, I don't know, I can't use Vue because of the Vue language extension whatsoever. Of course, also not writing, okay, it's the Vue official VS Code extension whatsoever, or this and this sucks and breaks. If these people would just report the bugs, then probably Johnson would be fixing them really easily instead of like hating how bad everything is, because that doesn't make things better. So I really think like Johnson's an amazing job for, as we just said, the web ecosystem, but also about the whole Vue ecosystem. And I finally made a video about Alien Signals when it was like 0.4 or so. And then Joss was like, wait. We're not done yet. There's more coming. And just highlighting like how someone who's like, okay, I want to improve Volar, so I need a faster signals library, improve the whole web ecosystem. And having that as an example, once again, coming out of the Vue ecosystem is really nice to see. Yeah, and people should, instead of writing another shit post on Reddit, maybe consider reporting their bug. Even it might not be that easy because, lots of moving pieces and VS Code version, code and so on, but that would actually help.
It's really difficult with anything that is the apex of a pyramid. So people experience the Vue language plugin, like if Vue support coming from Volar. And the thing is, he's working with a lot of moving parts. He's working with TypeScript. TypeScript can release breaking changes without a major version because they don't adhere to Semver. The numbers are just arbitrary. Like when we get to TypeScript 6, it's not going to be that there was a big change from TypeScript 5.9. Whatever. It's going to be that way because that's how they're just incrementing. But also IDEs are changing. And also Vue.js particularly needs to hack into the internals of TypeScript. So it's not even that there might be a breaking change for someone else, just a minor patch change to TypeScript could also break Volar. So there's so many of these moving parts, and it's easy for people to think, oh, it's a bug in Volar, like this is broken. I mean, we experience this also with Nuxt. If something goes wrong in PostCSS or in Babel,
or in Vite,
or Rollup, or in ESBuild.
Exactly.
There was a big breaking issue with ESBuild in a patch. I mean, it's still sub 1, so I guess it's a minor. But in like the final significant digit of ESBuild that broke Nuxt totally, and also all other Vite framework. But the point is, we're the end. We're that end of the wedge. So people experiencing this bug, they experience it with Nuxt. And so it's a bug they report to us. And the same, I think, is true with, obviously, Volar. You're triaging the ecosystem because the experience that people are having is they don't know where it's coming from. All they know is that they're using Nuxt or Volar and they're experiencing a problem. And so it's easy as a maintainer to think, not my bug. But it's difficult as a user to know where it's coming from and where to report it.
That's the other part. Yeah, like why, or like as a user, I can't really expect, okay, I see it here, I report it, and then maybe it might be escalated upstream somewhere. But yeah, I have the issue right now there in, let's say, Nuxt or Volar or whatsoever. And of course, like not everyone is a VS Code extension developer or framework developer or like has the time to dive in. But it's like, okay, I started, it doesn't work. Damn it. Then, okay, I check or report it back. At least like that's already, I think, a really good step there. But yeah, the maintainers of these projects, of course, then have the additional effort of like, okay, for Nuxt, well, this is a Nitro bug. There's another dependency. Here's something with Vite. And they, once again, with Vite might put it up further up the chain and so on. But that's also the part of depending on dependencies, sadly. And as you said, being the user-facing part. So in this case, the developer-facing part.
I do worry sometimes that I don't, like I do appreciate it when people raise bugs. I do worry that I don't necessarily come across that way. I don't know about how you feel like in your own projects as well, but because, I close them. I close the issues. Someone has created a reproduction and I say it's not a Nuxt issue and I close it. And I feel so bad about that because I worry that people will think I don't appreciate the effort that's gone into reporting it. And I really, really do. But there's nothing I can do about it, Yeah, I'm not sure I get that balance right always. I really feel bad. I wish I could give, an apology to people. I'm so sorry. You worked, you created a reproduction. Thank you for that. But it's not a Nuxt issue and I can't do anymore.
But I guess usually you give people pointers like, hey, it's not a Nuxt issue, but there's the problem. Or, hey, this should be reported there and there. So at least it's not like that's the end. You tried. Goodbye. You don't know how to continue further. Usually it's like, here's the next point where then people maybe have to alter reproduction. Like, okay, at least I narrow it down and I don't know, can downgrade a dependency or whatsoever. So it's not like they're lost in limbo forever, but more like, okay, there's yet another thing that's to do. But you also like, you can't fix the whole ecosystem. Nobody can. That's why like the delegation part, I think it's kind of necessary.
I hope so. I mean, you're right. It is necessary. It's totally necessary. But yeah,
I understand the feeling of like, hey, it would be nice to like just have a fix for it straight away. But especially if it's not a Nuxt problem, it's definitely, out of bounds, so to say, out of scope. But coming to not a Nuxt problem is a good point. There were quite some Nuxt releases this year, a lot of patch versions fixing some bugs. But of course, also a lot of minor versions bringing in features, being it experimental features, some, I would even say, polyfills for features that Vue brought on later, like Use ID in January. Of course, the X improvements and also actual features. So do you have a favorite this year where like, hey, this kind of feature or this kind of bug fix, if I have to pick once again one thing, or maybe top 3, like, yeah, these are so amazing that I have to highlight them?
So there are a lot of things to to highlight. In terms of the things, because there are things that I think are cool and there are things that I use all the time and that make a difference to me. So I think there's a whole raft of performance improvements, both on the server side and also on the client. And those are some of the things that I'm most excited about to use and experience. So actually, even in the patch release, I don't know, we've not talked about this, but I released a patch of Nuxt just a few minutes before we started chatting. And the performance improvement there improved startup time by 45%.
Ooh.
In the basic fixture. I can't promise that to everybody. That was the basic fixture in the Nuxt monorepo, which basically has got everything thrown in. But I think it will be proportionate to things like the number of modules you have installed and the number of page routes that you have in your app. So it should be significant for big apps. And those kind of things make a big difference to me. Also stuff like the shared pre-render cache, where basically we're adding a feature back from Nuxt 2, the idea that you could have this payload with data that's shared between different pages, which made sense, right? You fetch common data throughout your app, and then you don't have to fetch it for every one of the 10,000 pages that you're rendering.
Absolutely.
And the fact that in Nuxt 3 now, we're doing it basically automatically. You don't think about it. You don't even have to know about it. It's just automatically shared between pages that are pre-rendered just based on the key, which we already have generated or advised people to create. And so it just hopefully will just work and mean that we save 10,000 data calls. That's the kind of thing that I like most, when you basically get something for free. Mm-hmm. And that kind of performance improvement, I think, is really, really satisfying to bring. There's some other things like that are just very nice to roll out. And some stuff that's coming. Actually, on the DX point of view, another one that was just rolled out is HMR for root metadata and roots. Have you got a chance to try that yet?
I love
it.
It's so amazing. It's like I even saw people being like appreciating it so much on social media, but like, hey, whoever did that deserves a cup of coffee. And then it was like, yeah, hey. So no, I also think like this is such a game changer, because how often HMR like makes life easier if it works correctly, and for these things it's so amazing, especially now with the patch where I think there was an issue with query params that were not considered while like refreshing. So after that's being gone, it's like nice, lovely, so good. So yeah, also thanks for implementing that as well. People will be very happy.
I mean, bear in mind that I think I was following up on a comment from Eduardo, who implemented HMR. I mean, there were two bits to that. So one is the HMR for our virtual files, which was a big thing. And the other was the HMR for the roots themselves. And so Eduardo basically dropped a line to somewhere where he had implemented this in Unplugin Vue Router. And basically, I think I copied the code across, and that was the implementation. So I don't deserve a huge amount of credit for it.
But
the virtual files, I was pleased with that. Now to get HMR working, because we've struggled with that for quite some time. But I think we finally hit either the Vite capability or the implementation in Nuxt where it actually just works.
So that's definitely a delight to see.
Yeah.
And I also agree with like all the performance and also the DX improvements that you just get for free. Like, for example, also having SSR logs in the browser console in dev mode. So you're like, okay, I'm working on some stuff. I might not check my terminal. I maybe only have a single screen. And in the browser, you can see like, oh, there's a log. Like, okay, I know where to check. I also have that with a lot of people like, okay, check the console. Yeah, which one? The server, the browser? Maybe especially people are not aware, but like using SSR implies in terms of complexity. So that's perfect.
That is true. And I think there's more stuff coming there. So but yes, being able to see the SSR logs in the browser is really important. I don't know if you know, but you can now see Nuxt hooks in the performance panel.
Yes.
If you're on Chromium DevTools. So you'll actually see them as little like marks in the timeline of when the hook ran, which is really useful. I mean, you can see them logged out in debug mode where you actually see it in the console, but it's really nice to see it in the timeline, and that visually helps you sort of compare like when did this happen in relation to other things that were happening, other resources that we're downloading. And actually, I was chatting to someone on the Chrome DevTools team. We can actually put similar timings for server-side events that are happening in because you have the initial load, like how long does the document take to load? So we actually have a space in the timeline, and we can fill that out with other bars that actually include stuff like what was happening on the server and when did it take.
Wow.
And you'll be able to see. I mean, this is coming also to Nuxt DevTools,
yes,
which will probably be a better way because it will work across browsers. But I don't see a reason why we shouldn't also implement this in the browser dev tools, so people can actually see like, oh, we were doing some network requests and they were a waterfall.
Yeah, exactly.
Like just being able to see that that is the pattern without needing to add any debugging in your code.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that came in December in Nuxt 3.15, the Chromium support for that. So that's really lovely. And also, as you just said, having that available for all users, no matter which browser in the dev tools, I think is a key part here as well, to have the benefits for people using, I guess, Opera, Chrome, or Edge. And still people like using Firefox, like me, or most of the time, still be able to check that. Even though if you probably do like performance, like checks and some traces, you probably run Lighthouse and Chromium tools anyway, but nevertheless, it's still good to see, oh yeah, and the dev tools, hey, this plugin takes so and so long, it's async. There might be some things going on. So that's great.
Yeah.
Nice. I think another thing, which is pretty interesting, since I think it's Nuxt 3.12 in June, people can opt into a lot of breaking changes with the Nuxt 4 compatibility version.
And this is something that you really, I think, or at least the granular nature of that, right?
At least that was important to me, yeah, that people can like say, okay, I want to opt into this feature, but not this one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's actually been essential because it's been such a delay to the release of Nuxt 4, that's been in some ways out of our hands, because obviously we're waiting on dependencies. Honestly, I get so many questions from people via my Ask Me Anything bit on my website as well. But yeah, and people just like, when is it coming out? And it's really hard when it's not in your hands. The number of times I've been tempted just to release Nuxt 4 and then release Nuxt 5 when Nitro comes out, that would be a totally acceptable thing to do. And actually it would have been totally fine if we had done that back in June. I
just want to say, if you would be able to time travel back to June now and talk to like the Daniel in the past, to like Daniel from the past and from the future, Nitro is not out yet.
Yeah.
Release. Would you do that?
Yeah, I would. I would, because I mean, honestly, I think the fact that we have the ability to opt into the breaking changes is the most significant piece, because it means that we can test them out. And actually, we're coming up to, we've had half a year of testing these breaking changes and people are using them. I'm using them in my projects. Other people are doing it too. And it's totally fine. So actually, I'm very comfortable releasing those. It's not holding me back. I'm not worried about that. We need to do some stuff to migrate modules to use them. And we need to, I think that's the main thing. Just make sure that everybody is up to date. But I'm not worried about any of those changes. And so if I knew then that Nitro still wouldn't be out at this point, I would absolutely release Nuxt 4 back then, because I don't want us to be afraid of major versions. That's the thing. The longer you wait, the more it can feel like, oh no, what's going to happen? Because you don't remember the last major version, or the last one was far away. But for example, if we had released Nuxt 4 back in June and it was great, and we released Nuxt 5 in February this year,
Absolutely.
And it's great, it's not a problem. People will be able to update, particularly given that we're hoping it's going to require less migration than a minor, or a similar amount. We're not imagining it's going to be a lot of trouble for most people. So I would like to normalize the release of major versions, and it feels like maybe we passed up our opportunity to do that a little bit by waiting so long for Nuxt 4. But it's not a total loss. I don't think it will inconvenience people too much, because they will have been able to test and migrate if they needed to. And anyway, we're imagining this is about a day's job to migrate, rather than a matter of weeks or something like that.
Or months,
Or months, there might have been from 2 to 3. So this is a different order of magnitude. And at the end of the day, there's no harm. So I'm not losing a huge amount of sleep. I just feel bad. That's all.
Playing devil's advocate here, what's stopping you from releasing Nuxt 4 now?
Well, I'm not sure that's such a devil's advocate. I think the only thing that has stopped me releasing Nuxt 4 at any point is people telling me that Nitro will be ready sooner. So, or me thinking that it will be. So, I mean, I think that's the only thing that would really stop me from it. Or I guess, like the idea that we might release Nuxt 4 and then have to release Nuxt 5 the next month. Mm-hmm. That would be annoying. Like that would feel like that's putting people through an amount of churn that we don't need. That would hold me back, I think. So, I mean, I would like to see a little bit of air gap between the release of Nuxt 4 and 5.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's why hindsight is always better in this kind of case. Like if you go back and tell me in June of last year that it's going to be a solid 10 months before the release of Nitro, then okay, I feel great. That's fine. Like that's enough time. But now there's no chance it's going to be 10 months. Right now, Nitro is going to be out, I hope, within a month,
So that's why, like right now, it would not make sense to like, hey, I'll release a major now, and then in, I don't know, February, March, April, another one. Given that, okay, Nitro comes out, breaking changes, adapting them, testing them is still a little bit of period. So we'd probably still talk about like 3-4-ish months, something like that. Depending also when the release is, of course.
I think what we're going to see is alphas of H3 and Nitro. And I think then that's going to start to be the time. The thing is, I don't want to migrate the Nuxt ecosystem where there's still the possibility of further breaking changes in Nitro.
For sure.
The danger is I'm raring to go. So the danger is, and hold me back, please, that I will start sort of migrating everything too soon. And I think because there might be more breaking changes coming. So let's wait. We'll wait until all the breaking changes are there. We have the Nitro release candidate. We experiment with the Nuxt within the Nuxt monorepo. We have a Nitro release candidate, and then it's the time, I think, to start migrating stuff to work with a nightly version of Nuxt and Nitro. We get we release our own release candidate, start experimenting with it, start migrating stuff to it. And that hopefully means that if we do that well, then about a month after the release of Nitro, we should then be in a position to release Nuxt. That's what I hope. So that means that we're really at any point not too far away from the release of Nuxt 4. But it's just not totally in our own hands. That's
absolutely. But I mean, that's also something that comes up this year, so we can be eager for Nuxt 4 in 2025 for sure. There is no real way around that. So
no way around that.
When it's June or July, latest then Daniel will just release it.
I don't like that. That's the kind of thing that would give me nightmares. If in June or July we didn't have Nuxt 4, so don't even suggest it.
No, that won't happen. I'm just mildly joking here. Talking about June, July though. So in July last year, right, 1st of July, maybe that was the day that gave you a bit more thoughts than the 1st of January, because then Nuxt 2 officially became EOL.
That was a big move. I mean, Nuxt 2 honestly had been seeing very little development for quite some time, but not just from my point of view, but also from people preparing PRs or filing issues against it. I mean, probably more people filed issues than filed PRs, I tried as much as I could to merge whatever PRs people did create. We went back and forth on stuff like polyfilling crypto MD5 hash in Webpack 4, because basically something that Webpack 4 required internally was sort of deprecated, removed from Node. So it was a problem. And so we polyfilled it. And then Webpack polyfilled it, but not for everybody. So we ended up having to add back our polyfill for other Webpack plugins that hadn't done the same, basically. But I mean, apart from the odd PR, Nuxt 2 didn't take a lot of focus. Going back to the Nuxt 2 codebase, which, I was very familiar with at one point. Now I look back at it and I think, I could never go back from the current Nuxt codebase, because it's sort of typed, we're not sort of relying on classes with sort of implicit inheritance and overriding. Like, oh yes, this is an instance but we're overriding our own method to do this. And it made it very, very difficult to debug and sort of update implementations. Not that there's anything wrong with the code. It was great code, but it's a lot easier to maneuver around the new Nuxt codebase, which I love. And also, I was celebrating the end of life of Nuxt 2. I closed a lot of issues. That was also a great moment of satisfaction.
2.x closed. Yeah, I saw that in my GitHub notifications. Like, nice. I also felt that. So yeah, I think that's great. And also with Nuxt Bridge, who the Nuxt Bridge stable release was out in January as well. So people had a lot of time to use Bridge to migrate over. That was also helpful. I mean, that Nuxt Bridge wasn't officially out was also the reason, or like at least one of the reasons why the Nuxt to EOL was moved from the same date as Vue's over to half a year later.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it was a fair point that people made. How can we have a Nuxt end of life if we haven't actually had a stable Bridge release to use to migrate to Nuxt 3? I mean, in retrospect, I think Bridge was helpful to a lot of people. It was also not helpful to some people. It really depended on their project. And that migration from 2 to 3 wasn't as seamless, even with Bridge, as I would have liked. And 6 months isn't necessarily a huge amount of time to complete a migration. I think certainly if people had waited until the release of Bridge to do the migration, that wouldn't have given them fully enough time to do so. But still, 6 months was, after the end of life of Vue 2, was probably the right amount of time. Having said that, there are still people using Bridge today. And thankfully, Bridge has a great maintainer in the form of Ryota Watanax on GitHub, who's doing a great job nursing it along, adding new features even that we add in Nuxt 3.
Porting them, yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So big shout out. I think we also both met him at VueFest Japan. At least I met him this year.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, perfect. So like definitely it's so important that also all these let's say project the ecosystem have someone who is maintaining, driving them, and of course it can't always be the core team members or like I don't know you, Anthony, Puya, and so on, because well, at some point there is simply not enough time.
Oh, absolutely, exactly. And if we have to wait only for a core team member to implement a feature or fix a bug, that's a pretty bad bottleneck. Like you don't want that.
100%.
It's nice to have a good team.
Yeah, shout out to all of them. Shout out to all the contributors. And if you are there contributed to an open source project in the ecosystem, and also shout out to you and thanks for that. Yeah, and other than, of course, we talked a lot of Nuxt things here. And for everyone on the video gets a little bit of cat content. So if you listen to it, definitely check out either the show notes later for a picture or the video to see Daniel's lovely, lovely cat. Hope Bali is doing well.
She is. She wants petting, so she can have petting.
Yes,
and at some point she'll grow tired of it, and that will be also fun.
A lot of things happened in, let's say, plain Vue as well. Like Vapor mode got some improvements, but still not in beta yet. But still, we saw some benchmarks. We saw compatibility. I think like the basic VPress setup can be rendered with Vapor mode now. That was like the latest state I remember. VPress 1.0 also came out. Also another thing. So for static site generation, that's another good option. Plus, if like that's the tool that a lot of people on the core team use to dog food. In a way, changes like Vapor mode or the new roll down compiler as well to be used, trying to say like, okay, does it work? How things look like. So it's really nice to see also there are big movements that are not like, hey, there is a new shiny release, but more like there are steps in that way.
Yeah, I really do think that's the right way to go, is steps to make things better rather than figuring out the big perfect thing. And actually, it's not like it's incompatible with doing something big. Evan did a big rewrite between V1 and 2. There's a big rewrite in Vue between 2 and 3. Like you can at some point improve things step by step, and then at some point realize, actually, this has taken us as far as we can go. We need to do a bigger thing. The problem is if you hold off on the step-by-step improvements because you're hoping to do the big rewrite, like that's the problem, where you can end up in limbo. And the hope of the sort of perfect implementation is actually holding you back from what should be something that works now. There are things that I'm very much looking for. I'm really, really looking forward to Vapor that can be used in Nuxt. I've played around with it a little bit. I had some issues with server-side rendering, which I'm sure are Nuxt is a complex beast, a lot more complex in terms of what it does than VPress, for example. But I think Vapor we've seen stop and start a little bit in terms of development. There's been some huge pushes forward, and then there's been some pauses in terms of who has been able to spend time on it. I mean, that's the thing with open source. The time people have to devote to something isn't infinite, and it's not continuous necessarily. People have jobs, they have lives, they need to work on other things. And so some of these projects like Vapor can have pauses. But it's and Kevin would be another good person to shout out, I think, here. Like Johnson working on Vola. Kevin's done incredible stuff, not just with Vapor, and he by no means the only one working on it.
But also like Vue macros, for example, having a lot of things in general in the Vue ecosystem, a lot of Vite things related to Vite plugin Vue. So like he's doing definitely a lot. Also, of course, on Elk as well, where you're also involved. So definitely. And also there, you just mentioned it. Like, yeah, if you're working on open source, that's also tied to, well, you have a lot of things on your plate in general. But then also the topic of funding, which means, well, if you can't pay your bills, then of course that means less time in open source, but actually doing something that pays the bills. So that maybe also a good moment to mention that, to support the people, that's the tools people use, that be it a framework like Vue or Nuxt, and of course also the underlying things, because usually the user facing projects like Vue or Nuxt get a lot of, let's say, visibility, and a lot of people know they exist, while the sub dependencies, and we all know that XKCD about that, they probably don't. So that's also a good opportunity there to mention that. And on the other hand, there are, I think, two things that happened that year that kind of helped with that. Maybe not in a super like huge dimension, but the one thing is that the open source pledge launched, so to say. So basically initiatives to say, hey, companies should basically contribute a minimum of $2,000 per year per developer in companies to join the pledge and make sure that open source can be at least somehow be financed or made sustainable. So that's definitely an interesting project there.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting project, and the companies that are on it, that have, I think they are really putting their money where their mouth is. So Sentry for years has talked about their commitment to open source, and has tried to do it in a programmatic way. So it's the dependencies that are actually used rather than just the ones that are known. It's also the lower level dependencies, and so that has been a amazing thing to see. There are other companies too. I think Microsoft did a sort of airdrop of quite a lot of.
Yes, true.
That was interesting to see this year. But others like StackBlitz, for example, on the open source pledge, have done some amazing sort of contributions to open source. Not just, and obviously it varies in terms of what that contribution looks like. Sometimes it's GitHub sponsorships, but it's also empowering developers to work on open source full time. So think of Matthias Kepler, Patak, working on open source in Vite, employed by StackBlitz and enabled to do that in that way. Or other members on the Vite core team, for example, Björn, I think he's an Astro maintainer. And so that means actually you have this plurality of companies sponsoring members of the Vite core team, which is really, really nice to see, because it means it's this cross company project, not driven by one. But and that's all. Those are all ways of giving to open source, the explicit sponsorships and the implicit ones, I guess, by giving people's time.
And that's also important. Yeah, if it's not money, time is also super helpful. Triaging, contributing, and but you also just mentioned like Vite as a, let's say, multi-company backed project. It's super important as it's such a central key part of the modern web development right now. We also seen another company who also joined the open source pledge, also newly founded, regarding the ecosystem, which is VoidZero, so Evan's new company. Probably the listeners of the podcast heard the interview I did with Evan doing VueFest Japan. So also they're interesting to see that now 10 people full-time work on OXC, VTest, roll down, and so on and so on. So the whole ecosystem there to push that forward. Definitely also wasn't on my bingo card for that year, but was super exciting to see.
No, I mean, I sort of in the ecosystem, I've known about the company and things were coming, but obviously things have changed a little bit, and obviously, what is coming exactly. I think, obviously, Evan has a great track record of investing in open source and bringing good to the web ecosystem. And I think you do get that feeling that out of projects he's been involved with, like Vue and Vite, come a lot of non-empire-based projects. It's not about sort of building something yourself. It's about collaborating and doing stuff with other people. And so I have, every great hope for what VoidZero will do and actually how that's going to continue to look. I don't yet know where VoidZero is going. I would love to be a fly on the wall.
It will be exciting.
I'm optimistic.
It will be really exciting. Yeah, I also think so. And also just seeing, okay, there is VC money involved, obviously, but it's necessary to bring the velocity and actually have 10 people doing open source towards like improving the ecosystem and getting things up and running. It's definitely with Evan on top there and with the track record and with projects like Vue and Vite that show like, okay, this works out. I'm excited about it. Coming back to Vue once again, because they're here on ReVue and we're slowly going to wrap up. Before, I wonder, there are two minor versions in Vue, which is Vue 3.4, not really this year, December 2023, but I kind of still would count it in. And then Vue 3.5 in September, so also a bit of time in between there. Do you have a favorite feature that was introduced in any of these Vue minor versions? We're like, hey, that's amazing. That's what we needed and we're missing out before.
I like the built-in use ID. It solves some problems that we had in Nuxt, which we couldn't solve in Nuxt because they rely on Vue internals. It's the closest thing we have in Vue to a React hook, by the way.
Interesting.
It really, really is. Like in terms of how it calculates the ID, it's reliant on like the order in which things are running, and so it is very, very similar to a React hook. But it has to be, like you have to be able to match between server and client, and it's a very, very tricky problem to solve. That I'm pretty excited. I'm also really excited about the hydration control that Vue offers, and we're obviously still yet to implement that in Nuxt. But we've had a PR for the last few minors that we've been working on to add that, and I'm really excited about seeing that come to Nuxt as well. That I think is great from the Vue point of view, but it's also hopefully going to be great from the Nuxt point of view too. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
100%. I fully agree. And I think besides these two things mentioned, I was also a big fan, of course, the defined model being stable as a macro.
Yes.
That's like, it makes the two-way data binding so much nicer, less boilerplate, and it makes a lot of sense. Of course, also Vue 3.4 picking up the hydration messages, improving them. I mean, I talked a lot about it. I gave a talk at Vue Amsterdam about it and about hydration in general, and also about the features. So it's really nice that it's now way more visible, especially where you have these hydration errors. So that's a big plus. And eventually, props destructuring the RFC that became stable, so we can find these structure props without losing reactivity.
Yeah.
Good features. And of course, like DX improvements, like the vbind short name, so like colon my value. If you have the name in the script setup or in the script part, then it's matched, which was even up like, I don't know, 5 years ago, and people were like, it's too complex, let's not do it. And now we have it. So I remember to Vue 2 times to have that discussed, and people were like, it's not beginner friendly enough, it's not really clear. But especially now with Volar matching that, and then we have once again the circle and giving the inlay hints saying, hey, this is bound to that. I think it's a good addition.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, then before we wrap up, I have a very quick fire with some spicy hot takes, and then we got it. I know your time is rare, and we're running a little bit over time. Sorry for that. So, okay, first question: should Vue remove the options API? Yes or no?
No.
No. Bolt.new or VoidZero, as they both have Vue support?
Bolt.new for me.
Bolt.new for you. Interesting. Have you used it?
I have. I used it actually before it was released. I pulled a few strings with Patak, and he was like, okay, here you go.
Nice.
Show me what it was like. And it was I think it's pretty cool. I love the fact that it can run a Nuxt environment, for example. It feels really nice. And obviously it was built from the scratch to be agnostic, as opposed to sort of. So anyway, I like both. Yeah. Obviously, they're both great. I'm not saying anything against.
Oh no!
But
100%. Okay, then the last one. What is your favorite Nuxt package that's not part of the core? So like not Nuxt / not your own.
And not one of my own, you say?
Yes.
Oh, terrible! How dare you say that? So I think one of my favorite is Nuxt.OG image. I just love it, which is obviously one of Harlan's packages. It's not even Nuxt.js. It's just Nuxt.OG image. It's fully in his own namespace. It's just great. Obviously, it relies on technology under the hood like Satori, which are also great packages. But I think it gives that sort of chef's kiss to a site, being able to write your open graph images in Vue, get the HMR when you're developing them. That's really nice. I mean, I think there are other libraries that are amazing. You could Vue use, for example, or I personally love Uno CSS.
Absolutely.
Lots of great stuff there, but I think I'm going to have to give it to Nuxt.OG image.
Sweet. I mean, also that the whole Nuxt SEO, let's say the wrap up of packages got like also V2 stable in November is also another addition here. So yeah, we see a lot of good things. There's lots of honorable mentions we could talk about, like that Vue is the fastest SSR framework out there based on benchmarks, which are, well, more or less realistic. About component libraries, Inspire UI, whatsoever. We have a lot more on the list, but let us out there know, or like you out there should let us know, that makes more sense, what we missed. What is your favorite thing about 2024? And maybe the last thing is, how do you feel about the Vue.js ecosystem and the Next.js ecosystem in 2024?
I'm so excited about it. Thumbs up. I think one of the things that I was worried with the release of Nuxt 3 back almost 2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I was worried because because basically we had sort of there was a bit of a blow to the Nuxt ecosystem, and also I think there was a similar one in the Vue ecosystem where there was a bit of a pause in developing new things. That's not what we see this year. Stuff is accelerating. I think the fact that you mentioned a couple of UI libraries, there's so many, and people are actually building new stuff. They're adopting it. They're using these UI libraries. And why is that? That's because people are building with Vue and building with Nuxt. So there's a lot of usage and adoption, and I think acceleration in the ecosystem. And that is just really exciting to see that, it's bright skies ahead, I think.
Splendid. I mean, I think that's the best last words we can have for this episode. That was our year in review, so to say. Daniel, thank you so much for joining the DejaVue podcast once again. All the links to your socials, Blue Sky, and so on, stream all in the show notes. And to everyone out there, check out the newest episode, if that is the newest. Otherwise, the latest episodes, the show notes for all the links and resources. And see you all in the next episode of DejaVue. Goodbye, everybody.